You guys will scratch them off, like see me, look, I'm scratching them off right now.
Every customer should know that the gas has a carbon tax in it, right?
Not a lot of people are paying a lot of attention to them.
These anti-carbon tax stickers must now be displayed on all gas pumps. We're peeling away the politics behind the message. The next time you go fill up, you may notice something new stuck on the pump. A new law requiring stations to put up the Ford government's anti-carbon tax stickers is now in effect. Not doing so could land station owners with a hefty fine. Lisa Shing is live tonight downtown. Lisa, are gas stations complying?
Well, most of the gas stations that I've been today are, Chris. In fact, this one behind me has them up either in French or English. But there's a lot of controversy over whether this is a good way to spend taxpayer dollars. A message to drivers filling up before the Labor Day long weekend and to the federal government. These stickers, mandatory as of today, are the latest weapon in the province's war against the federal carbon tax. Most gas stations we visited put them up, but if owners don't comply, they could face penalties.
I don't like the idea of having to be fined if something happens to them.
And there are rules about where they have to go.
The stickers must be in prominent location on the top two birds of on here. It should be always displayed.
The top two-thirds, wow.
Two-thirds of the board should be always be displayed with the carbon tax, and it is showing about even if the sticker is peeled off or it is damaged, we have to order for the new stickers.
Individuals can be dinged up to $500 a day or $1,000 a day for subsequent offenses. It's much higher for corporations.
If it is like a responsibility and if you are missing it and they are fining us, that is a little bit harsh.
In the spring, the Premier said the province would crack down.
We just want to inform the public. This is why the gas prices are going up.
Now, gas stations will get a bit of a grace period. For the first few months, they'll be focusing on compliance and education. Drivers have mixed feelings.
Like see me, look, I'm scratching them off right now. See?
That's a fine right there.
Is it? Really? It's okay. Just ridiculous, that's all. There's no need for it.
We already pay a fortune for gas and filling up, and they add another tax to it. Just makes it more expensive.
What the stickers fail to mention, that most of that money that you pay into the federal carbon tax actually gets back to you in the form of your tax return.
Oh, I didn't know that, no. So,
what do you think of the stickers now?
I don't really see the need for them.
The whole sticker situation has been hugely contentious. The official opposition is obviously against it. The Green Party mocked up counter stickers. Even the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, generally pro-government, has slammed the move for being too political. And so, Chris, really, if you think about it, the PC's actually earmarked $30 million. That was way back during the election campaign. So, you know, political purposes, questionable. A lot of people are questioning that for sure there. It's also important to note that, as we said, a lot of the people, the critics, are pointing out that there's not a lot of information saying that a lot of the money that you spent towards the carbon tax will be returned to you in that tax return.
All right, well, thanks for this tonight, Lisa. If you're taking a road trip this weekend, expect to see the OPP out in full force. As always, they'll be looking for impaired or aggressive drivers, seatbelt use, and distracted driving.
Inattentive and distracted driving is not just about drivers talking on their cell phones. It also includes anything that takes the driver's focus away from driving. We have seen motorists doing a variety of activities from reading to texting. Unfortunately, a lot of drivers underestimate the risks associated with inattentive and distracted driving.
Police even bringing out some props today to show the dangers of distracted driving. And with the start of school just a few days away, officials are asking motorists to be extra careful.
According to a new survey by CAA, more than 9 in 10 parents said they have seen one or more bad driving habits in a school zone. And those include speeding, illegal parking or stopping, distracted driving, not stopping at marked crosswalks, or not stopping for school buses.
Not stopping for a school bus, for example, that has its lights flashing, can result in a fine of up to $2,000 and 6 demerit points. York Regional Police say the Labor Day long weekend is off to a disappointing start after making 4 arrests for impaired driving before 1 this afternoon.
Types of incidents, are something that we really hope to stop seeing on our roads, and they are entirely preventable by essentially just making the right decision and making other arrangements for your transportation if you're going to be drinking or using drugs.
Officers say one of the incidents was a 2-vehicle collision in Newmarket that sent people to the hospital. Another call in King Township saw a driver and a passenger both passed out in a car. The first 3 arrests all happened before 10 a.m., with a 4th coming around 12:30 p.m. 2 people were arrested for impaired driving by drugs and the other 2 for alcohol. Police are asking all drivers to report suspicious driving and remain vigilant when out on the roads. A funeral will be held tomorrow for the Uxbridge woman killed in the boat crash involving TV personality Kevin O'Leary. Today, Susanna Brito's family released a statement saying, "Our family wishes to express our gratitude for the outpouring of support we have received from police, first responders, the medical community, our friends, and the entire Uxbridge community following the tragic death of our wife, mother, daughter, and sister, Susanna Brito." The 48-year-old was a mother of 3 children aged 12, 11, and 9. 64-year-old Gary Poltash from Florida was also killed. Sources have told CBC News that he was visiting his friend, Dr. Irv Edwards, and was on his wakeboard boat at the time of the crash. This all happened, of course, Saturday night near Emerald Island on Lake Joseph. O'Leary says he was a passenger in the other boat. The OPP Criminal Investigations Branch is heading up the police probe. They have not said whether speed or alcohol were factors in the collision, and no charges have been laid. Police say they are looking for anyone who might have video from the area from around the time of the crash. The province's waterways have already seen 11 deaths this year, and this weekend, police will be stepping up their patrols, hoping to prevent any more tragedies. It comes as officials are looking into whether it should be mandatory to wear a life jacket while aboard a boat. As Shannon Martin shows us, just having one nearby isn't enough.
It's a message we've heard for years. Wearing life jackets or PFDs saves lives, but for some reason, it doesn't seem to be sinking in. Barbara Byers with the Life Saving Society says the stats prove it again and again.
80 to 90% of people who drown when they're boating did not have a life jacket on.
Right now, you only have to have a life jacket on board. You don't actually have to be wearing it.
So if you think you can reach and grab your life jacket and put it on when you're going to be thrown in the water, well, you're probably wrong, because you're not. It's just like thinking when you're driving a car, I can put my seatbelt on if I'm about to get into a head-on collision.
It can be a split-second thing, right?
Yeah.
Accidents happen, it comes out of the blue.
Right.
Thinking you can grab a life jacket and put it on, you might be already in the water.
Well, exactly, and it's not necessarily that you've done anything wrong. People say, well, I've been boating my whole life, I know what I'm doing. Well, yeah, but things happen.
In order to change that sort of behavior of not wearing life jackets, do you think we need to see something like at the federal level to just make life jackets mandatory?
Well, at the Life Saving Society, we would support mandatory law, but primarily, like for all vessels, but primarily the smaller vessels that are under 6 meters. So those are the vessels where most of the fatalities occurs. People wear life jackets. I think, I know that the statistics would be very, very small, and I think people think of life jackets as those big orange keyhole ones, like from old movies like Titanic.
This is an inflatable life jacket. It's
Right.
a lot smaller from the ones I remember back when we were kids.
Exactly. Like many people are surprised that these even exist. So it's light, you just slide it over your shoulders, you just buckle it in, you just make sure it fits across. If I fell in the water and I needed the flotation, I would just pull this and inflate it. So I can show you if you like.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is more than enough flotation to keep me in the water, and here's the cartridge that I had used, so I would have to replace that cartridge now, but it means I have flotation in the water, and there's lots of flotation, so I could float for a very long time.
Nick Cernkovich joins us now. Nick, it's always important to stay safe on the water. How will the weather be while people are out boating this weekend, though?
You know, Saturday's actually looking pretty good. We've got a little bit of rainfall to deal with, more so towards Sunday and Monday. But with that being said, I don't think we're going to see a lot in the way of heavy rainfall, just some light showers. Here's a breakdown of the long weekend forecast. So we do have a sunny Saturday. In fact, the best of the days is going to be Saturday if you're planning to head outdoors. A few showers to talk about, and we'll get to that in the long range forecast. And temperatures hovering near seasonal, which is where we were today. Right now we're sitting at 22, 23 degrees across the GTA. Earlier today up to 25, and the average is about 24 degrees in the city. Now, clear skies through tonight, and that's actually going to allow temperatures to drop. So the clear skies in combination with the less humid air that we're seeing now, or the dry air that we're seeing now, is going to allow temperatures to drop down to about 11, 12 degrees across the GTA tonight. By tomorrow, expect clear skies right across the board, but into Sunday, we're watching an approaching system. Now, the model's having a bit of trouble forecasting the timing of this and the location. It's actually sort of shifting more toward a Sunday night into Monday event, but we'll talk more about that in the long range forecast. For now, though, 12 degrees tonight, winds still a little breezy there, 20 to 40 kilometers per hour, 23 degrees tomorrow, lighter winds. Your full forecast coming up in just a bit, Chris.
All right, great. Thanks, Nick.
You bet.
To the United States now, where Florida is bracing for a storm that Donald Trump has called an absolute monster. Dorian has strengthened into a Category 3 hurricane with winds of 185 kilometers an hour. It's forecast to hit the state early next week. Stephen D'Souza tells us more.
The storm prep routine is all too familiar for Florida residents. Line up for gas, line up for water, food, and supplies, then stock up on lumber to shield against the incoming storm.
It's just stressful. I've been through this a couple times in the last 15 years, and this is the worst so far.
Adding to the stress is the uncertainty. Officials don't know right now what path the storm will take. The president approved a disaster declaration today, so all 67 counties in Florida are under a state of emergency.
This is potentially a multi-day event where it will churn slowly across the state. That obviously creates a whole host of issues.
Florida's power utility is warning of extensive damage and outages, and officials are telling people to stock up with a week's worth of food and water. The storm, already considered extremely dangerous, is expected to reach Category 4 status when it hits Florida next week. It's approaching slowly, gaining in strength and intensity. And while there have been no evacuation orders yet, Florida's governor says, be prepared.
Better to evacuate and then it not end up hitting you than to remain in there and end up being in jeopardy of loss of life.
The storm is expected to hit with winds topping 200 kilometers an hour, along with heavy rain. At the Kennedy Space Center, NASA moved its mobile launch platform indoors. The biggest worry for coastal communities, the storm surge. Dorian's arrival coincides with the highest tides of the year.
If the storm surge happens to come in right when you're at high tide, and then you have large ocean waves from these hurricanes on top of the high tide and the storm surge, that's a recipe for disaster.
Officials say tropical force winds could begin in some areas of Florida as early as Sunday, so the time to prepare is now. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, New York.
I was thinking, who's this person? This is not the person I know. The hormonal replacement.
It makes women feel better during menopause, but hormone replacement therapy is controversial. Coming up a little later in the show, we'll bring you a new study with some important potential risks researchers have identified. Police in Hong Kong arrested a number of prominent pro-democracy activists ahead of tomorrow's planned mass demonstrations. And authorities are warning residents against participating in unauthorized rallies. But Sasha Petrusik shows us that is not deterring organizers.
These three leaders are among the most prominent, but a number of others, local councillors and other members of the legislature, say that they also have been either detained or questioned by police over various activities connected to these protests, which have paralyzed Hong Kong over the past couple of months. Now, what is the government strategy behind all of this? Well, Joshua Wong says that it is actually counterproductive because the government is responding to pleas for negotiation, for some sort of a conciliatory action with batons, with arrests, with tear gas. And this is what he had to say after he was released today on bail.
We shall not surrender. And I urge international communities to send a clear message to President Xi. Sending troops or using emergency ordinance is not the way out.
Now, the activists and the protesters that I spoke to today think that these arrests, far from sending a signal to the protest movement that it should calm down, will actually get people more riled up, that they will be more upset and more eager to get back out onto the streets, whether it is permitted or not, whether it is legal or not, whether they themselves risk arrest or not. More than 900 people have been arrested over the past number of weeks, but they don't think that they will be backing down anytime soon. There is a protest that was planned for tomorrow, another big one, perhaps drawing as many as 1 million people as it has in the past. That has been canceled today because the police just simply wouldn't give permission for the protest to go ahead. But there is a loophole which could mean hundreds of thousands of people could still be going out onto the streets. Under Hong Kong law, religious movements, religious marches do not need police permission to go out onto the streets. And it could well be that all of these people who were intending to go out on a political protest may suddenly be out chanting hymns and making their point in a very different way. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Hong Kong.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, was asked today about events unfolding in Hong Kong. She says Canada is keeping a close eye on developments.
When it comes to the situation in Hong Kong, Canada has a particular interest, given the 300,000 Canadians who live in Hong Kong. And so we are watching the situation closely and will continue to do so.
That was Freeland speaking at the University of Toronto. She went on to say that Canada has made 3 formal statements expressing concern over what's happening in Hong Kong.
The results are variable, but they do raise some important questions if this test will work down the road.
A standardized math test for teachers in Ontario is coming, but the agency now tasked with putting the test together says the research shows tests like that don't often work. We'll go to the EQAO for that conversation coming up.
The weather update is brought to you by Train Extreme Conditions Testing. It's hard to stop a train, really hard. Train, the most reliable heating and cooling brand.
A young woman who pressured her boyfriend to kill his teenaged ex-girlfriend more than a decade ago has had her day parole revoked after she became entangled in a love triangle outside of prison. The Parole Board of Canada made the decision this morning after hearing that Melissa Todorovich had failed to disclose 2 romantic relationships, breaching one of the conditions of her release. She was convicted of first-degree murder in 2009 for setting up the killing of Toronto teen Stephanie Rangel. Todorovich was granted 6 months of day parole in November. At the time, the board said she had made progress in understanding what led her to plan the murder. Today marks a grim anniversary for family and friends of murder victim Sonia Varashin. It was on this day in 2010 that the 42-year-old nurse was reported missing after she failed to show up for work. Her body was discovered almost a week later in the woods not far from her Orangeville home. Investigators believe she was murdered in the house. No one has been arrested in her death. Now to new research important to women's health. Hormone replacement Therapy for menopausal women has been controversial for years, but a new entry in an important medical journal has uncovered potential risks associated with a certain mix of hormones for women. Nicole Ireland explains.
The hormonal replacement.
Blanca Tovar Verma first came to talk to her family doctor about menopause a year ago.
I was one of those women who thought, I can do it on my own.
But her hot flashes and night sweats became so intense, she barely got 3 hours of sleep a night. She had a busy career and loved to travel, but depression and desperation set in as she felt her normally energetic self slipping away.
One day I was thinking, who's this person? This is not the person I know. This is not the Blanca I know.
6 months ago, she and Dr. Iris Gorfinkel decided to try hormone replacement therapy, even though breast cancer was a potential risk.
The question ultimately is, how bad are those symptoms? And do those symptoms impact enough negatively in her life to warrant hormonal replacement therapy?
Hold your breath. Research findings on hormone replacement therapy and breast cancer have been inconsistent over the decades. So Oxford University scientists combed through years of studies involving more than 100,000 postmenopausal women who had developed breast cancer. Their findings, published in the Lancet Medical Journal, say the formulation of hormones women take matters. About 1 in 50 women who take estrogen and progesterone for 5 years will get breast cancer. That number decreases to 1 in 70 if they take progesterone less often, and if they take estrogen only, the risk decreases to 1 in 200. Another critical finding, how long women take hormone replacement therapy for also makes a difference.
Increasing duration of use was also associated with a significantly increasing risk of breast cancer. So limiting use to under 5 years of either formulation would be ideal.
Joanne Kutsopoulos wrote a commentary on the Lancet study.
Clinicians and patients have to work together to really have a frank discussion about their symptoms as they enter menopause.
For Dr. Iris Gorfinkel, that's the key.
It's not a slam dunk, one answer for everybody. The answer should be a very individualized response.
That worked for Blanca Tovar Verma. She's back to her normal self, confident they made the right decision for her. Nicole Ireland, CBC News, Toronto.
The Toronto Argonauts' newest recruit stands 4 feet tall and weighs in at 50 pounds. 7-year-old Darius Rasso is a football fan who's been battling leukemia. And yesterday, he signed a one-day contract with the CFL team.
Here goes Rasso. He's got midfield. He's got a couple of blockers in front of him as well. A diving attempt by Eldon Darby Jr. is not going to work. He's got James Wilder Jr. in front of him. Rodney Smith with the final block to the 5. Touchdown. Darius Rasso to the house.
Pretty impressive. First time on the field with his new team and his first career touchdown. After a morning of team meetings and news conferences, Rasso was off and running. The Argos GM says they're thrilled to have a player of Rasso's stature on the roster. He managed to outrun the defense for 65 yards, and so it's no wonder they call him Razzo Dazzle.
E-scooters could be coming soon to a bike lane near you. I'm Lorenda Redekop along Queens Quay. The province has released details of proposal for a pilot project for e-scooters to run in Ontario. It would last for 5 years. Some people love the vehicles. They do run in other cities all across the world, but some people hate them and they worry about safety for other road users. I'll have more coming up a little later.
Consultations on bringing e-scooters to Ontario are being extended. That's after some organizations for people with disabilities raised concerns about plans to start a pilot project in September. Lorenda Redekop joins me live now. Lorenda, what's the latest?
Well, we learned what the province is looking at, its proposals, and it means that e-scooters could join the cyclists out here on bike lanes like this one and all across the province. We got some of the information on the proposals saying that the province is looking at doing a 5-year pilot project. These e-scooters would be allowed anywhere where bikes operate, not allowed on highways. The minimum operating age would be 16. Helmets required for anyone under 18. You couldn't have any passengers on these e-scooters, and then the maximum speed would be 32 kilometers an hour. Now, these e-scooters, they're stand-up versions with a motor of scooters that we've seen for children. They're incredibly popular in cities all around the world, and rental companies have popped up in cities in other countries, very popular in the U.S. They also do operate in some other cities here in Canada. They really zoom along, as I said, maximum speed 32 kilometers an hour, and that's one of the concerns for disability groups. I spoke with one advocate for people with disabilities, and he is blind himself. Take a listen to his concerns.
It presents a safety risk to members of the public, including people with disabilities like myself. I'm blind. If they come zipping along at 32 kilometers an hour, are silent or close to silent because they're battery driven. And it's especially a concern because they are a motor vehicle.
But people who I talked to today out here, they actually are pretty much in favor of them. Take a listen.
Somebody who does like electric transportation, I am definitely on board. I think with the amount of traffic congestion that we have, that a lot of it would get relieved by people having an alternative. And with this being a lot easier than riding a bicycle, same with the scooters, you're not sweaty when you get to work, it becomes very appealing.
I really like them. I use them a lot. They're super easy. You know, you don't have to check any public transportation, no taxes. You just find the scooter here, you take it to your door, and you just have to make sure you've parked it somewhere safe and correct. So I think if the city has the structure for it, then it's not a problem.
And the province wants to hear from you. So you have until September 12th to let the Department of Transportation know what you think of the idea for an e-scooter pilot project here in Ontario. Chris?
Thanks, Lorenda. NDP leader Andrea Horwath is giving her MPPs some new roles in order to take on what she calls a scandal-plagued Ford government.
That's why I have created a critic portfolio called Ethics and Accountability. And I've asked Taras Natashak, the MPP for Essex, to take on that work.
Horwath has also created a new critic role for autos and manufacturing. Niagara Falls MPP Wayne Gates has been tapped for that job, while Toronto Centre MPP Suze Morrison will become the NDP's first tenant rights critic. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is taking aim at his opponents today. He's been facing backlash for his plan to suspend Parliament for 5 weeks, just ahead of the Brexit deadline. Renee Filippone has more from London.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson is rebutting claims that the move he made to suspend Parliament is undemocratic and trying to throw it back at his opposition. He says they want to stop Brexit altogether, which would go against the referendum results. He is trying to get across to the public that he is working hard to get a deal with the EU. But he says all the opposition and protests and legal challenges are making it harder to negotiate. Because the Europeans will get the idea Parliament could block Brexit.
The weird thing is that the more the parliamentarians try to block the no-deal Brexit, the more likely it is that we'll end up in that situation. So the best thing now is for us to get on and make our points to our European friends with clarity and with vigour, and that's what we're doing.
Johnson's government has stepped up negotiations with the EU. Representatives on both sides are now meeting twice a week. Now, this morning, a Scottish court rejected an emergency bid to block the suspension of Parliament, but the judge agreed to a full hearing next week. The MPs behind the challenge say democracy is at stake.
If we do not ultimately win this case, what does it say about the British Constitution that a Prime Minister with a majority of one and with no majority for a no-deal Brexit can simply suspend Parliament to get what he wants? That's what happens in dictatorships.
There are also two other similar cases being fought against the injunction, one in Ireland and the other here in England. And along with the court challenges, large protests are planned for right across the UK this weekend. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, London.
Environmental activist Greta Thunberg met with UN officials today. She's urging them to take strong action to tackle climate change.
We have high expectations in you to and all member states to deliver.
The 16-year-old says she and her generation of activists will keep up the pressure on world leaders to stop ignoring the climate. Earlier in the day, she joined hundreds of other teens for a rally and protest march. Thunberg's school strike movement has inspired students around the world to skip class to rally for the environment. She arrived in New York on Wednesday by sailboat after a 2-week journey across the Atlantic from the UK. All right, let's get Nick back in here now. And Nick, you were saying that tomorrow is really the best day to get outside of the long weekend.
Yeah, it looks like it. We've got sunshine in store for us, and also some pretty mild temperatures as well, or at least about seasonal. Today, 25 degrees, that's what we hit as a high, and that's just about the seasonal mark. A little cooler right now as we head into the evening, and you're going to see these temperatures dropping because we're under clear skies, but also because of the drier weather as well. And those two things actually help sort of drop the temperatures through the overnight. Evening temperatures at 22 degrees right now in the city of Toronto. Just to put this in perspective, here's a look at averages. 24 is the average high, the average low, 12 degrees or 12 and a half. It's about where we'll be. And some pretty interesting extremes here, from the record highs to lows, and also the record rainfall for this day, set back in 1970. So we're not touching any of those. As I mentioned, clear skies. What we are tracking, though, is a system that's developing way back to the west. And the model's having a hard time sort of putting this thing together because it hasn't formed yet. So that, in combination with, as we head toward the shoulder seasons, the forecast models tend to have a little bit more difficulty in terms of the timing of these systems. But we'll do our best here to sort of time out what we've got with the latest information. So tomorrow morning, still looking like clear skies. Clear skies through the day tomorrow as well. But as we move into Sunday morning, watch for cloud cover to move across the GTA. There's that system that's developing. It looks like we may see a few spotty showers Sunday afternoon, so I haven't ruled it out totally. But most of the rainfall really coming towards Sunday night into Monday, and then tapering to showers again on Monday. Winds are going to lighten up as well, by the way, moving to a more northerly direction by tomorrow afternoon. Overnight temperatures tonight, we're looking at around 12 degrees, which was right on that seasonal mark. And then heading into tomorrow, we've got daytime highs again of 23 degrees. Sunday and Monday, about a 30-40% chance of showers on both days. Temperatures hovering around 22, 23 degrees. And back to school, 24, and a mix of sun and cloud. Chris.
All right. Thanks, Nick.
You bet.
Toronto Public Schools will offer free menstrual hygiene products to students beginning this fall. It's part of a growing movement to end what's known as period poverty among girls and break down barriers to education. School board trustees voted unanimously this week to provide menstrual products in all secondary and elementary schools across the city. The board will partner with the Ontario wing of a national organization called Physical Health and Education Canada, which has a relationship with suppliers of pads and tampons. The initiative will come at no cost to the TDSB. A standardized math test for new Ontario teachers continues to be a lightning rod for debate.
We're creating a system where we can measure success, because in the absence of that, how are we going to know where we're started and where we ought to be? I think we got to change the way we teach.
Those dollars that are invested in EQAO should be invested in the classroom and in resources for kids, and that randomized testing that shows trends is the better thing to do.
Today, even the Education Quality and Accountability Office, known as EQAO, is calling the effectiveness of a standardized test into question. In a new report, the agency says competency math tests for teachers don't often lead to better outcomes for students. Despite that, EQAO is the one the province has tasked with developing the test for teachers. Cameron Montgomery is the chair of the EQAO and joins us now. Cameron, thanks for being with us.
With pleasure.
So first of all, it seems pretty fair to think that teachers should meet a certain standard when it comes to math, but what does your research show as to why a standardized test for teachers does not often lead to better outcomes?
Well, Chris, I mean, there are varying results when we look at the research literature, what's out there in the world, in the States and across the world in terms of the relationship between math knowledge and student outcomes, or pedagogical knowledge of math and student outcomes. In some jurisdictions, students do succeed thanks to competent teachers that have great math knowledge and pedagogical knowledge, and in other jurisdictions it just varies. So the results are variable, but they do raise some important questions if this test will work down the road, and I think it will be important to measure down the road the effectiveness of this test.
So, what are some of the things you found as to why the test might not work?
Well, there's the whole intrinsic motivation, how motivated one is to learn math and to teach math. And if someone is anxious teaching math or about math themselves, it's very difficult to impart that and to teach that in the classroom. So I think it's important to work on student teachers' intrinsic motivation. And I think the goal here is to have future teachers with a solid understanding of mathematical concepts and a solid understanding of how to teach math, which should correlate to successful teaching in the classroom.
I wonder if a standardized math test isn't something that EQAO thinks is necessarily the best approach here. Is there something different? Is there something better that should be instituted?
The government has mandated EQAO to create the test. That is our role and our task, and the agency does an incredibly efficient job with that, just like the other tests that are created and done. I think what can come out of this, what I'm hopeful to see, Chris, is our math courses. I think it said in the study itself that when student teachers take math courses or their university experience is positive, that does correlate with effective teaching and high student outcomes. So I like to see faculties of education collaborate. They're doing an incredible job. I worked as a professor of education. I know my colleagues are fantastic. And I think if we just get we're all on the same page, and we're working towards building a great future for Ontarian kids. And I think it's an important first step to have a good understanding or grasp of the issues of how math tests or standardized testing is happening out there in the rest of the world. What are the pros and the cons? And that's exactly what this report does. And I think the public should be the agency thinks the public should be aware of these pros and cons for sure.
All right, Cameron. Well, thank you very much for speaking with us today. We appreciate it.
With pleasure.
As we head to break, here's a look at where the markets closed today. The TSX was up 57 points. The Dow Jones was also up by just over 41, and the Canadian dollar traded for an average of about 75 cents US. We'll be right back. A far-right group in Canada that's now eligible to get on the ballot this federal election is facing some opposition. It's called the Canadian Nationalist Party, and it gained official party status after submitting the names of 250 supporters to Elections Canada. That has prompted a group of anti-hate advocates to say they plan to expose the names of those supporters. Ashley Burke has the details.
We feel that, people shouldn't be able to hide in the shadows.
The Canadian Anti-Hate Network wants as many people as possible to know who is supporting a far-right group, one that's under investigation by RCMP for potential hate speech.
We should really know who in our neighborhoods are supporting this in a really a bit to shame them. Hate has no place in our communities, it has no place in our society, and we need to call it out wherever it is.
The group plans to post online the identities of more than 250 members of the Canadian Nationalist Party. The goal, it says, is a peaceful conversation.
Maybe someone will actually talk to you and try to explain why hate is not okay and why, we should be sort of embracing inclusive communities.
The party's members' names and addresses are on the public record at Elections Canada. The department's bound by law to release that information upon request.
Our expectation is that people will treat that information responsibly because there is some personal information there.
The leader of the Canadian Nationalist Party said his members are worried about their safety.
Some of our members are simply concerned that physical harm may come to them, physical or social harm.
The party is under RCMP investigation for possible hate speech because of this video in which the leader denounces what he calls, quote, the parasitic tribe. He says it controls the media and the central bank in Canada.
I think it's far too dangerous for us to be taking this action of publicly trying to shame people.
Winnipeg's former police chief warns it could lead to serious harm, not just to those on the list, but family members, especially children.
I think we probably have seen issues like this in the past, and most definitely it could incite violence because we really don't know what actions a person will take when they're confronted with something like this.
Since the Canadian Nationalist Party applied for official status, a number of members have asked Elections Canada to remove their name from the paperwork. Their identities will remain unknown, and the party has retained enough members to meet the requirements. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
This is Lonnie Bissonnette, and he is quickly becoming an internet sensation because of this video of him skydiving in his wheelchair. And Lonnie, you're going to be making another jump like that tomorrow.
That's right, I'll be jumping into the opening ceremonies for the national championships.
We'll have Lonnie's story coming up.
The Toronto Raptors are going back to their roots for the franchise's 25th season, bringing back their original Dino jersey. In a video posted on Twitter today, the reigning NBA champs showed footage from their championship season spliced with some throwback clips from the early days. The team wore the original jerseys from 1995 to 1999. Kyle Lowry wore the retro jersey during the Raptors championship parade in June with Damon Stoudemire's number 20 on the back. Toronto will begin the new season on October 22nd against the New Orleans Pelicans, during which they will unveil their championship rings and raise the championship banner. Skydiving is certainly not for everyone. It takes a lot of courage to launch yourself out of a plane, but imagine how hard it would be if you were in a wheelchair. Greg Ross spoke to a man who is planning to do just that tomorrow at the National Skydiving Championships.
It's a video that's been viewed millions of times on the internet. That's Lonnie Bissonnette jumping out of an airplane in his wheelchair. First of all, you didn't expect that to go viral, did you?
No, I didn't. No, I was pretty surprised. I put it up there just for kind of as a teaser for what we were going to do at Skydive Wasaga Beach.
This was a test run he did a few weeks ago while preparing for one of the biggest jumps of his life. Yes! Tomorrow morning, Bissonnette will perform the first jump during the opening ceremonies for the National Skydiving Championships in Wasaga Beach. Tomorrow, it's going to be important to stick that landing again. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people watching.
The pressure will be on, right? So I haven't actually seen the landing area. I hope it's smooth, you know, so that I can put it down nice and soft.
Bissonnette has been skydiving and base jumping for decades. But it was a tragic accident during a base jump 15 years ago that put him in this wheelchair.
We were down in the States and I was logging my jumps and realized that I was about to do my 1100th base jump. So I wanted to do something cool to remember it by and to celebrate it.
2, 1.
He and several friends were planning to jump together off this bridge that is a little under 500 feet in height. Bissonnette was planning a forward-facing quadruple backflip.
When I left, I just was flipping too slow. Came down to time to open and I rushed the deployment and the pilot chute, which is part of the parachute, opened up and just wrapped around my foot and never had a chance to fully open.
Bissonnette hit the river below hard.
The first thing that went through my mind was, God, that hurt. And then the next thing was I need to get out of the water. And when I went to move to try to swim up out of the water, I couldn't move anything.
He says somehow he managed to get to the surface to get a couple of breaths before sinking back down. It was just enough to keep him alive before his friends could rescue him about 2 minutes later. The next thing he remembers is waking up in the hospital.
And the first question I had from my doctor was, after I looked at myself and I said, you know, how long do you think it'll be before I can jump?
Bissonnette had a broken neck, multiple broken vertebrae, and severe damage to his spinal cord. He was first diagnosed as a quadriplegic.
She just looked me straight in the eye and said, I'm sorry, you've suffered a spinal cord injury, you're paralyzed, and you'll never jump again.
But he has since regained all of the function in his arms and some of the function in his legs. And despite the original diagnosis, he was back to skydiving again in less than a year.
It took me 10.5 months to do my first parachute jump. which was actually a skydive with my son.
He's been base jumping and skydiving ever since, but rarely does he do it with his wheelchair. He designed special straps to keep him secure in the chair and even a special parachute for the chair just in case he has to release it. Greg Ross, CBC News, St. Catharines.
The long weekend is just minutes away, at least for some of us. But will the weather be as nice as it looks right now? Look at that skyline. We'll check back in with Nick at your last look at your weather forecast coming up. Here's our picture today, sent in by Daffy D. It's this great shot of a streetcar passing by St. Clair Station. Perfect picture for the long weekend, as I'm sure a lot of people are going to be whizzing off to their plans. Many people probably on the highways and whatnot as well. Thanks for sending those pictures in. And get your photos to us by posting them on Twitter or Instagram with the hashtag CBCYourGTA, and we'll air some of them on the show. I am still stuck, though, on that skydiving story that Greg just brought us with the guy who jumped out of the plane in a wheelchair. I mean, I don't think in a million years I'd be jumping out of a plane in anything.
Yeah.
But it's amazing to see.
But you know what? I'll tell you, I used to fly skydivers for a lot of years. Okay.
Oh, right, okay.
And we had.
Is it as scary as it looks?
I've done it a couple times, but I'd rather stay in the plane. But you know what? It's actually pretty cool. But we've taken a lot of people up. Like it's, they've really adapted the sport over the years. Like it's really cool to see what they've done. I started flying skydivers back in 2001, I think, something like that long ago, right?
Okay.
And it's
So you
amazing
have a lot
to see
of
how things have
experience.
changed. Yeah, it's amazing to see how things have changed.
And how about the
very cool
skies?
Well, tomorrow would be a great day for skydiving. You got to stay clear of the clouds, right? So sunshine tomorrow, 23 degrees. On a cooler night tonight at 12 degrees. A little bit of rain, as we talked about, for the rest of the weekend, but not a washout.
Right, so try to get that fun time out in the sun on Saturday, and then maybe a board game inside on Sunday. All right, great. Well, that is our show for tonight. Have a great night.